much for coming here. My name is Nora Nelson. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Director of Arts Engagement at Seattle Rep, and we're so thankful and thrilled to be partnering with Lushootseed, the UW Intellectual House, to put on this lovely event. This event is in conjunction with our production of Where We Belong by Madeline Sayette, which is a production that talks about language and language revitalization from the perspective of a Mohican artist, Madeline, who is the playwright and performer. That's going on at Seattle Rep now. Please do check it out. It's a beautiful show, but we wanted to make sure to bring this local context to the language revitalization efforts happening with the Lushootseed language to supplement the conversations in the show and give that local context to the kinds of themes that Madeline is talking about. And y'all are absolutely also welcome. If you have not seen the show yet, you can use the promo code SCIENT, which is the last name of the playwright. You can find it in our little brochures back there with the information about the play, which will give you 40% off of tickets. We'd really love for you to come and to bring your friends. It's a really important show to see. So I would love to acknowledge as a non-Native American, Indigenous American person, that I live and we all live and stand on Native land here in Seattle, and specifically on Coast Salish, Duwamish land, and we're very thankful to be able to be on this land, to have conversations, to connect together, to live here, but recognize a very sordid and heartbreaking, in some ways, history of the way that we came to be on this land, many of us who are not Indigenous to this land, and also recognize the folks who are still here and thriving and keeping this incredible culture alive and growing in the midst of colonialism. So that being said, I would love to invite our incredible partners here at Lushootseed, Casey Weinkoop, who's the Assistant Director of this beautiful cultural institution.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey Weinkoop. I am the Assistant Director here at Lushootseed Intellectual House. I'm a member of the Spokane Tribe, and we just wanted to welcome you all to this event that we were happy to be a part of and co-sponsor. And we worked with Tammy Hahn at the end there a lot for our programming here at Lushootseed, particularly when it comes to the Lushootseed language. And we just wanted to make sure that we addressed and talked about the way that this facility, the University of Washington and American Indian Studies Department have, what we've done with Lushootseed language. And I would be remiss in not talking about Lushootseed, the name of our facility that was gifted to us by Vi Hilbert. I can't remember how to say it. Tatsu? Thank you. All of you. Member of the Upper Skagit Tribe, and who was a part of the process of gifting that name to this facility, which I have been told translates to Smart House. And then when the university heard that name and worked with that name, it became Intellectual House. So Lushootseed Intellectual House was a name gifted to us, to the folks that helped plan and build this building years and years ago. Thankfully, when I was still a part of that planning committee and with us. So we've been honored and grateful to work with that name and try and live up to that name and everything that it entails. And has since opening, since building this facility, been fortunate enough to work with folks like Tammy from the American Indian Studies Department, and even over the pandemic when we were all stuck in our houses and doing virtual things, Tammy helped us plan a virtual panel with scholars that had graduated from the University of Washington, have been a part of our American Indian Alaska Native communities, and studied American Indian Studies Department and Linguistics Department here at the University of Washington, and then went on to work for their own language departments. And that was one of our most successful events when we were all, or many of us, sheltering in place and during that shutdown of the university not being here in person on campus. So that is the best, I think, introduction that I could give to this space, and in particular how Lushootseed has been an important part of what we do here every day. A big part of what we like to do is teach folks how to say, but y'all are all already correcting me, so I don't think I need to teach you how to say what, blah. You got it. So thank you for being here. It's good to see you all, and it's good to have us all back in this space. Thank you.
And I do want to point out that there is a really exciting expansion of this facility planned. You should check that out if you go out to your right restrooms. There's a whole vision for what this is. So please look out for opportunities to support that expansion as they get that underway if you're able to. This is such an exciting and incredible cultural institution here. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much. Parking is very difficult here. And we will get in a moment after we have a wonderful welcome. You will get an opportunity to learn how to say Lushootseed from Dr. Tangyong. So get excited about that. So now I have the deep pleasure and joy to welcome Ken Workman, who is the great grandson of Chief Seattle, to welcome us. He's the one that should be welcoming me. I have no right to welcome you. So he's going to give us a quick welcome to invite us into this space. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Donna. It's quite all right. Well, to talk, and this is how we generally start things in Indian land. A long time ago. I'll to talk, I teach a long time ago on this land lived many people. Duabsta, Suquabsta, Tokwabirsta, Lumbista, Zanista, Ka Atsatsitilbif, Adisha Padachos, and that all of these people and many more lived on this place. I'll to the hop, the Sapa, the hills, to the Alkai beach, if I saw to be at the past, Slalia is the Bishop Padi. A long time ago, my grandfather, this person the world knows as Seattle, stood on the beaches of Alkai, and he said, "Come ashore." He said, "Slalia" means come ashore. Slalia is the Bishop Padi, come ashore onto the sand of the ancient Duamish. And then he said, "Grihi is the Grihi means welcome." And so that was the beginning of the big change. And that was just yesterday. That was only 171 years ago. In Indian time, that's nearly 2 grandmas old. And so for us, the world turned upside down. And we see that Seattle is a large metropolitan city known all around the world today. And so we as people say the very same words that my grandfather spoke on Alkai Beach 171 years ago. We say Gui hit out, because Gui simply means I am talking to a person. But when I say Gui and we duplicate that, it means I'm talking to a whole canoe full of people. But we recognize the world is a much smaller place now. And so we say Gui hit out, which means everybody. Gui hit out is the idea of Te Alone, welcome everybody onto this land of the Duamish. Slalia is here, Ishaparate Alone, we hit down. We hit down. We hit down. You are all welcome here. Bring your canoes ashore, they are welcome here. Thank you.
thank you so much Ken, for welcoming us. Now I would love for Dr. Tammy Hone to join us to help us learn a little bit of Lushootseed here that we can all take away, and so that we can share the proper name of this location when we talk about this event and future events. Thank you, Dr. Tammy.
Another doctor. I'm just a regular person. Tammy Hone seed pasta seed stop. Kaszta seed stop. Spoil option. My English name is Tammy Hone. My native name is Kaszta, and I'm a member of the Puyallup tribe. To all Chud Lushootseed and to Squally Nishad. I am from the house of Lushootseed of the Squally family of Puyallup. Oyaisha to Lushootseed, Saliachi Zaladu Yapti Kol. I've been working in Lushootseed for 29 years now. And I really want to take the opportunity to teach you guys about speaking Lushootseed because for some reason it has been challenging for many people across campus. So when we have opportunities to help with the pronunciation, it's great to do them. So I have my document here to really pull it up. I'm going to teach you about the word as well. I'm going to put spaces between the syllables. Oh, sorry about that. And I'm separating this last two. Even though it's all the same syllable, I still want to separate it so that you can emphasize on it. So let's work on the speaking. I separated the syllables to help you as you're reading a word on your own, and it can help you identify what pieces to look at. The first part is what. What. You guys have to repeat after me. What. The second part is shla. So this letter here is a barred L. So you want to put your tongue in an L position, like lemon, like you see where your tongue is. Thank you. And that's where you want to keep your tongue, and then you simply just blow around your tongue. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for that. This is the area where it's been mispronounced so often, and many people have spoken it as a sha and not a shla. But sha is not correct. You don't want to say washaba. We'll take off that sha and keep it shla. Washla. Washla. You guys are sounding great. Washla. This long stop down here isn't necessary in the grammatical structure because the suffix is alt. And suffixes really don't need glottal stops before them, but root words do. But because it's spelled with it, I'm just keeping it there, I'm not removing it because it's embedded. But just ignore the stop and just say ball. Ball. So now you got wash the ball. Wash the ball. Wash the ball. And then this T X-raised W is a T with a blow after it. Blow it. Nice and strong, even if it sounds like you're doing a dry spit. You know, you can do that.
Let's hear them.
Right. Let's do these last two.
Let's hear the. Let me hear them say it.
She wants to hear you.
Oh, right.
All right, let's speak this one together. Vault. 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 What? Shla. Ball. Washla. Alt. Lushootseed. When I was little, we had the bouncing balls over syllables. So we don't have a ball that bounce here. Lushootseed. It's the best I can get. Lushootseed. So lush, now I'm going to teach you about the intellect of that word. That's which is great. Because the root word for lush is to be intellectual. This schwa is the linking vowel. Linking vowel, and it's basically for word formation. When words are put together and you have a bunch of suffixes to add to your root. The linking vowels really help for the word formation for speaking the word. Proper fluency. The B suffix is for involvement. The involvement of the root word, which in this case is lush. So there's an involvement of being intellectual. Or to be involved. And then alt, and I wrote it both ways there. Alt, when I spell it, like I said, I don't use this glossary. I just use this alt. And I apologize for not having a symbol there. It is a lexical suffix for house or building. Get the right font here. House or building. So you can see how there's an involvement of being intellectual. It's the house or building, so it's the intellectual house. Intellect flows in and out of this building every day. And the intellect of the knowledge of our people are what rises to the top here. And so when you come here and you're here for presentations, conferences, workshops, anything, any gathering here, you can feel that intellect flowing of the cultural ways here. Any questions to that? Yeah.
The notion of intellectual means essentially a feckless middle class twin. Why did you stop using the word smart and go to intellectual other than the weight of syllables?
So it's just the English formation that you're thinking
It
of?
carries a lot of baggage.
And to be intellectual?
Yeah.
It could. I am from the house of Lushootseed, so, and I'll write that here. So I am from the house of Lushootseed down here, so it's the intellectual. Aj is a lexical suffix for on either head, and then alt for building. So being from the house of Lushootseed, I am descended from intellectual people. I appreciate that. But you can see that when we relate and cross-reference our language with different ways that it's used, we can see the true meaning of our language, the true intellect of our language. And I try to be mindful when people are learning language to remind them to please don't get hung up on the English translations, because these are just our best attempts at describing the intellect of what our language is really saying. But don't get hung up on that. But, you know, it's a natural process. You know, smart can be the other way too. You can be a smarty pants. You have a smart mouth and it's not always the best either. That's great. Yes.
I'm really curious because I use the word chawat for smart.
Mm-hmm.
And could you say something about how chawat refers to lush?
The difference is that I haven't seen Chawat in our Southern Lushootseed resources, and I'm very resource-based. I extract language. That's one of the best practices that I do in working with the language is I take our old sources, whether they're old documents that were researched or recordings that were done from the early 1900s to the later 1900s. I listen to those, or I'm cross-referencing with documents, and I see how these root words are working together, and I extract language. So if I found that, I would have pulled it out and extracted it, but I haven't seen that one yet. Okay, in use. The IPA. I'm sorry.
That's a can of worms.
Are you talking about the writing thing? The alphabet that we use is the IPA. It is. It is. It's the International Phonetic Alphabet. It's worldwide, used worldwide. So many indigenous languages around the world use the IPA. And many of our local indigenous languages use it as well. It is, it represents our language so well because we can identify a consonant like blush, consonant, vowel, consonant together, and that is the typical formation of root words, consonant, vowel, consonant. Unless it's the word for all, then it's, the glottal stop is used as the consonant replacement, but it's not affecting the pronunciation. Then it would be consonant, vowel, consonant there. So, and that would, yeah.
Remind me again what the equal sign means.
It means it's a lexical suffix. It's a suffix of a word that represents, that exists of that word. Like the word for hand is chalish, chalish. Chalish. And the lexical suffix for hand is achi. Achi. So if I want to say my hand hurts, I would say achi. My hand is sore, my hand hurts. So then you're using a lexical suffix as just using that description of hand hurting, so you know that you're saying your hand hurts. Yeah.
Coordination question with the last sounds of the last syllable. So with the TXIPA, so that's an inverse of like and then you blow after, or you kind of.
Yeah, you have your T, and then just blow.
So it's not.
It's almost together. It feels.
Twist.
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 Twist. Or twist.
Was
You've given us some relations for you to think of. Was.
Sorry.
WH in English is the same sound, so where, what, when, why, that's all WH sounds. Actually, it's W. Gives you a little more English correlation with that. The IPA, this alphabet to write our language, started becoming embedded in the early 1900s, and I think Arthur Beller, I think, was one of the first ones who started integrating some of these letters into the language documentation. And then you can see how it evolved. The written language has evolved over time, where more and more of the IPA was integrated. And then when Tom S. came, he totally cleaned it up. He really put so much work into the language to make it the way it's used today. I learned so much from the work that he had done. And I was fortunate enough to get to thank him in my lifetime. Because I told him, I don't know that I would have grown in language to the point that I have without the work that he had done. And then I stayed by Hilbert an hour later, and she says, "Thank you for thanking Tom." I said, "How did you know? I just sat there." She said, "Well, I know I find things out really fast." She says, "But I want to thank you because he doesn't get enough thanks." She had grown so much because of him. The work they've done together was phenomenal. And we have so much because of the two of them together. He wanted to make the writing system easy for her. And she got upset and she said, like, "What do you mean? Are you saying I can't learn how to read our own language, my own language?" He says, "No, that's not what I'm saying. I just want to see if you want me to simplify it for you." She said, "No, don't do anything to make this easier for me. I'm adapting to this just like anybody else, and I want to learn it as it is." She put her foot down. She was not afraid to put her foot down. Nancy has a request that you guys speak Lushootseed again. So are you ready? Lushootseed. Okay, bouncing on here. Lushootseed. Again. Lushootseed. Lushootseed. So we have fluency bars in our speaking, so where your vocal tone is higher and it's lower. Lushootseed. Same with speaking language in phrase form. Your vocal tones go higher to lower. Even if you're asking a question, you don't raise your vocal tone to ask a question. You speak it as a sentence. Because you either have the question words or the question indicator express it's a question. Vocal tones are not needed in that way. But when you're being dramatic, be dramatic. Don't be afraid of that. Any other questions for that? Appreciate you all being here, yes.
When you use vocal tones, is that another way of saying, emphasizing a syllable? Like when you have an emphasis on a particular syllable?
It could be.
I don't see any emphasis signs there, and I often don't see them, but
Oh,
sometimes I do.
you're talking about a vowel stressor?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we don't.
It's in the teaching.
I know, it's all in the teaching, what
Okay.
Nancy's saying, it's all about how we teach language.
All right.
We teach about the speaking process, but I've never felt like vowel stressors are necessary.
Okay,
Um,
that's very interesting. Thank you.
And it's part of the dictionary though. If you're looking at the dictionary and you see a vowel stressor, then you can pay attention to that. If you haven't heard it being spoken, sometimes it's nice to see that, but if I were to just have signage or language just out, I wouldn't feel it necessary to place them. Alright. Thank you guys for all of your questions.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That's amazing. When I met with Tammy about this event, which she was also integral in making this event happen, she connected me with all these panelists and gave me so many folks that we could invite. And in fact, in this whole process of trying to put together this event, I learned how much Lushootseed language revitalization is happening here in this region. I mean, it's really, really incredible how many different organizations and teachers and different tribes are all doing this work and know the language and are teaching that to the next generation. So really incredible. But when she got together with me, it was such a pleasure in that meeting. She taught me how to say this, which I'm so thankful for because since then I've been really using Lushootseed all the time, unless I really have to say and in parentheses, the intellectual house. So I really hope that everyone, as Dr. Tammy, you are a doctor, Tammy and its teacher Bob have shared, it's just so important to use the actual word because the translation is just not representative of what that word means to this space. Now we're gonna jump into our bigger group panel discussion. We have incredible panelists here. I'm so thrilled to have you all. And because you do so much, I would love for you to introduce yourselves and share, where you're from, what tribes you represent or are from, and also any how you're connected to Lushootseed language revitalization and the language itself. Ken, would you like to start? And yeah, we have 2 microphones. Please do use them because it's a big room.
Test.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. I used to speak down to the dogs. I am working for the language track. I create a young sculpture. My great grandson achieves level. This is Yayos means word and Strokes means man. And so this is the only name that I have. The name that I came into the world with is in fact the only one, Yayos Strokes. And so I'm retired from the Boeing company in flight operations engineering. And so on one side of my brain, I have an engineering capacity, and on the other side, I have DNA, descendant of Chief Samuel Duwamish. I was born and raised right here in this city, on the banks of I was born on Elliott Bay, and then raised on the banks of the Duwamish. And so all of this land is very particular to me, in that I'm imprinted here. When I say that, what I mean is every time I get near Elliott Bay and the waves are crashing and the summer sun is setting and the smells rise up, then I come alive. And so the air is crisp out here. And so when I'm traveling overseas and I come back, the air here is special and is different, and I know I'm home. So I'm not any different than bird, than duck, than salmon, or this is my place. And so there isn't any conflict between my scientific side and my native side. There isn't any conflict with modern religions in our religion. So this is who I am. I used to see that at the drums. Thank you.
My apologies for being late today. I am not a city girl, so finding a parking spot is a challenge. I have to lift it to all of you. And my very patient husband. Du was ein der Buckelshoes Abschnitt to all Ched Buckelshoes. But T. George White, Teeds to Bod, Bernice Corville White, Teeds to Skoy, Maggie Daniels Corville Bar, Teeds to Kaya, Amos Corville Sr., Teeds to Zampa. My name is Valerie Billick. I am an enrolled member of the Lushootseed Indian tribe. I'm a direct descendant of the Daniels family. However, that could be debated. As the Indian agent was making the rounds as directed by the governor of Isaac Stevens to create a census, my grandfather's English name was Daniel James. So his name was transposed, which could be why Nancy and I might be cousins.
We are.
I work for the Lushootseed language program as a coordinator for the program. I initially was supposed to be co-hosting with my director, Eileen Richardson, who is also Lushootseed. However, she's had some serious health problems in her direct family, and she really apologizes she could not be here. She was very much looking forward to coming. I've been working in the language field for 22 years. I took a 5-year hiatus for reasons I won't go into, but I'm back and I am starting over in a sense. There's a lot of knowledge that I have not been able to use because of my surroundings, but now it's starting to come back and be renewed in my mind. So this to say that anything that you learn does have a place. Don't give up on yourself because it's there. It has a resting place within you. Especially language because it's an identifier for me personally. To know that I belong to an indigenous group of people that are very important to me. And it dictates my life and my choices, and it dictates a lot of the decisions that I make. So I'm thankful that I can identify as a Lushootseed. I'm very thankful. thankful for the many sacrifices my ancestors made to keep our language alive. Muckleshoot suffered quite a bit of atrocities. We no longer have any fluent speakers of our language. Most of the work that we are learning our language from, as Dr. Hone indicated, are from recordings of individuals that gave of their time. And I think because with a will for purpose, they knew that it was important work that they were doing. So my hands are lifted to them as well. We have a lot of work to do still at Muckleshoot. And I'm really grateful also to other speakers that are lending assistance to our program to help us. And we've suffered many losses in our community and have lost many of our language knowledge seekers. Last 2 weeks ago, we laid to rest one of our language knowledge keepers, and with him went all the knowledge that he held. So it's devastating. But at the same time, as Dr. Hone indicated from why our talk should do, we're feisty people. We're not going to give up. You can take and take and take, but you can't kill what's inside of us. And we're all finding that strength and renewal as we engage in the language. And I have to say this about why. She was about, in my mind, about 4'11", but she was probably taller than that. But she was so tiny. But that woman could hold her ground. And I traveled with her on numerous occasions because she wasn't driving any longer. And she would preface her introductions by looking out at the crowd, and she'd say, "My name is Takshabdu. I'm from the Upper Skagit people. Do you know that this language was the first language of this land that you're standing on? And I think every one of you should learn how to speak that first. Not English. It's the first language of this land." And I used to think, whoa. But she was very forthright. And I have to say the courage that she must have had to talk to Dr. S and say, "Don't dumb it down for me. I want to learn it the way it should be learned. Because I can do it, and those that follow after me will too." And there's evidence right here. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for accepting my apologies. I know you all did for me being late. It's not Indian time. I actually just couldn't find it. I didn't have an Indian guide with me. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. McKenna Sweet-Dorman, Sweet Staff. Tolstad Stopaldu. My name is McKenna Sweet-Dorman. I am from Snoqualmie. I am an enrolled member of my tribe. I've been an active member in my tribe my entire life and have had the fortunateness of learning from so many teachers. My work in Lushootseed is very new. That I've been learning my entire life, all these 29 years that I've been here. I have also been born and raised in my traditional homelands, and it's true what others have said about our connection here and the connection to the language. Our language is born of our land, and our land is connected to us. What happens to that land happens to us. What happens to our language happens to us. But it's all still here, and it's alive. It's alive in each of us, despite all of the things that have happened in our history. And it is a short history, how quickly these things have happened to our people and to our culture and our history. Our teachings are still alive, though, through this language. And the revitalization work is so important in making sure that that is passed on for those next generations. That's what our elders did for us. What they sacrificed and what they have left us in their hard work is what we're all touching and making sure is still alive for those next generations. So I thank you all for being here tonight too.
comfortable here. It's true that, I'm sorry I cry a lot, but I do because of the passion of the language. But it's true that our language is considered dead because we no longer have first language speakers. And yet it is up to us to get this ball rolling, to get back into making Lushootseed alive again. And it's going to take so much work. It is taking so much work. I have embedded a lot of Lushootseed into close to 100 people here at the university. And really having great opportunities to instruct the language through the American Indian Studies program. And it was hard for people years ago to grasp the concept of teaching people outside of the tribes. And Vi Hilbert got a lot of flack for that. And she took those hits with stride and she just kept going because she knew that it takes everybody to do this, not just, we can't count on just 1 or 2 people per tribe who are doing the work in the language programs. In fact, our language programs across the Pacific Northwest are all still very new. They feel very new yet because the ability to really fully understand the language takes a lot of work. And digging out those language resources and bringing the communication of our language back out again. And when I teach the communication of our language so that people can start using it in a way of communication and to build on that. I want people to formulate their conversations naturally. I don't want to spoon feed a conversation to people to have. Language should be like any language of the world that you're learning. You should be able to naturally think in the language and speak what you want to speak. And there's a lot to that. But with the loss of all first language speakers, we look upon those strong elders to look at for guidance. Like George Adams, he's Nooksack, he's an elder, he's been working language for years, and he really works strong in etymology. And we do have a strong etymology for the language, and I've already showed you just through Washington how much there is there. But there's so much yet to bring forth in our languages, and we are on a mission to do that. And all of us here at this table, it's our mission to strengthen our languages, strengthening our cultural heritage. Everything that you see with Native people today, you see the canoe journey, people want to preserve those traditional travels, those social ways of life. It's so important to connect to each other. We wear regalia with pride, and it connects us to our past. Weaving our own regalia or weaving regalia for our family and loved ones is such a gift to be able to do. Everything that we do and we work together is building up our spiritual healthiness, because we need that inner healing of our spirits, because we are still wounded. Just thinking about what happened to our elders and our ancestors all of these years past. We live with that inside of us. So it's hard to not feel that. Because every speaker I listen to, I hear those voices and I think, what a treasure. I wish I could have sat and spoke to her or to him and just had conversations about their knowledge and what they experienced in life and everything possible. We listened to Willie Frank Sr., who was 100 years old when he was recorded. And it's really difficult to listen to his speaking because he didn't have teeth. but yet we could hear every bit of the language that he spoke. And he spoke and he said that he was 7 years old when he was put into school, taken from his home. And his father was working for a man whose last name was Frank. And so when they asked him what his name was, he said Willie, and the only other name he could think of was Frank, so he said Willie Frank, and that was the origin of his full name. And he was born speaking the language. He was just raised with it, fully natural, in that old sense, being fully supported, fully spoken everywhere. And when he was placed in that school, he was not allowed to speak his language. But he would do it because he knew at 7 years old that he needed to still speak his language. He was so afraid of losing it. And when the other kids would hear him speaking it, they would tell on him. And so he would be punished because they told on him. And obviously when you hear that in a recording and he's telling a story, you think, okay, so he was punished, but he was still thinking about this at 100 years old. To say I was punished, it impacted him. But he also said that he kept his language all of those years. And when he got out of school, he still worked at keeping that language intact and allowing it to grow. And then he was part of the preservation of our language. We're so fortunate for his life. We're so fortunate for his survival and his determination to maintain. And then to raise Willie Frank Jr., who was a treasure to all of us. And we're so lucky for, I guess, the whole Frank family. Yeah, there's so much to feel, there's so much to cry about. I'm not ashamed to cry. I wish I didn't, but I can't help it.
Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from each of you how you first learned the Lushootseed language, what your journey has been to learn the language. And maybe we can take away some ways that we can be able to learn a little bit of it as well.
We'll start down here again. We'll go right.
So with regard to learning Lushootseed, as a small child growing up in the woods of West Seattle, on the West Duwamish Greenbelt, I always knew that these trees and these woods, they hadn't heard real people talk, the native people's words for a long time. And so I had in me a sense that these words have to come back, and the trees want to hear the words. And so a half a lifetime goes by.
Switch. Here we go.
So So half a lifetime goes by, and I advanced in the world and owned a house and all kinds of things that other people do. And then I decided to take up a Lushootseed language class because I saw an advertisement for it. And in that, I had instructors teaching me words like cat and dog and river and tree and eagle and hawk and things like that. But that's not how I talk. And so then I moved on to another instructor, and another instructor taught me words like house and sun and earth and flower. But none of the words were ever put together into a cohesive sentence. So I was just learning words. And I knew that when I got to flower, that something had to change. Sakaita is flower. And so to Sakaita, the flower. That didn't work, because I knew flowers were beautiful. So I had to learn Azah Sakaita. And so then I began to create sentences. And it was only when I came here to the university
and Dr. Tammy Hahn and Nancy Jolab here were teaching in the same way that I could learn. When I described myself earlier, it was the engineering side of my brain. And I'd already created what I call cheat sheets. I had a base vocabulary of about 300 words. And I'd already studied this language with affixes, suffixes, and structure, tense, vowel harmonization, these kind of things. So I knew what the rules were. But when I came here, these instructors were teaching in a way that I naturally migrated to as an engineering person. And so this was just heaven for me. And all of a sudden I could talk. And that's really what happened. I went through our dictionary, our Lushootseed dictionary. And I read every word, and I read every description. And then I put it down. Because learning how to, or reading a word is not learning. And then 6 months later, when I picked this same dictionary up and went back to this language, the words exploded off of the page, just like in the movies. And all of a sudden, I could see the stems, the roots, the affixes, effects, suffixes. I could see tense. And so all of a sudden, I could talk. And so this is how it comes to me as an adult, learning Lushootseed.
Thank you. I heard the language as a child, or when I was in the setting of the Shaker Church in Lushootseed. It was in that setting that the people were not afraid to speak their language. It was freely spoken. And in the mess hall, when they had a meal after their church services, they would speak the language. My grandmother raised me probably more than she wanted to, but she did not want to teach me the language because of her past experience growing up. She was taken from her family at the age of 3. She was the only daughter, the youngest, and she was taken to a government boarding school up in Tulalip and was not allowed to speak her language. So my grandmother always felt shame that she didn't speak good Indian or good English. That's what she would tell me. But she did not want to teach me the language, but I would hear it. So that was my first introduction, that we as a people had a language of our own, but I didn't know what they were saying, and I wasn't permitted to know what they were saying. And so in 1997, there were classes being offered at Muckleshoot, and I took a class, and it just resonated with me. I started labeling things in the IPA font for the language, for anything that I could identify in my house, and kept trying to memorize all those words. Like this gentleman said, they were words, but it really didn't help me converse in the language. But I still felt very good that I was learning some of the language. I'm really thankful for those beginnings. And so my journey continues today, where I have sat and listened to the recordings as well, and have studied them, and have listened and listened over and over and over to get every nuance I can from what the speaker is saying. Even though I couldn't quite understand or grasp what they were saying, I kept following the recordings because it just united me to that person. They had a message. So my language journey is continuing, and I'm not fluent. I would say that there's these folks here at the table can speak more clearly than I, but what I do have, I treasure, and what I do know is that I'm going to continually get better as I keep using the language, and that's what I'm doing with my job and with my studies. So that was my first introduction to the language. Because my supervisor wasn't able to be here, I just wanted to read you a couple of comments in regards to this question from our language teachers that are teaching in our community, how they answered this question. It was pretty profound. They're kind of shy, and to get them to just talk about stuff was like really hard. Pulling teeth would have been easier. So I resorted to shame, and then that was. It's, how did you learn the Lushootseed language? And this is coming from one of our youngest teachers, Becky Sheldon. And she says, I learned the Lushootseed language a little bit growing up. I learned animal names. I didn't realize that I was learning my own language growing up. It was just being taught to me. I started learning the language, though, more seriously when I was hired to be a language apprentice at Lushootseed. And that was in 2013, 14. She's now teaching high school and junior high. Oh, high school, junior high. This is from another teacher. This is from Stephanie Lindgren, and she teaches birth to 3. And she said, I learned the Lushootseed language when I became a language apprentice. I had previous teachings, though, from an elder by the name of Donna Starr, and she taught me how to introduce myself. And I learned some basic Lushootseed words and phrases when I worked for the daycare as a youth worker, when Eileen, our director, taught there. And then Luana White Eagle is one of our more proficient speakers. She teaches 3rd and 4th grade. She takes her job really seriously, and she devotes a lot of her own personal time just doing what I think everyone here has done, and that's just researching and looking at the whys of why a word fits together the way it does and why it's so descriptive. But she's extremely quiet and shy. So for her to be up here would have been torture. So she said, the first time I learned the language was from Donna Starr and her late daughter Birdie in high school. In August of 2016, I started learning Lushootseed from Nancy Jo Bach and Tammy Holm as a Muckleshoot language apprentice. And I just have to say that she has blossomed into just an incredible researcher and teacher. The kind of teacher you want to have when you ask a question that you know might be kind of dumb, and she responds in this gentle way and helps you understand. She breaks things down for me every single day. And when I go to her with my grammar and I say, Luana, I'm not sure about this. Can you please explain? And she'll immediately go to her laptop, pull up all this stuff, and then she gets the dictionary and she looks it up and she just breaks it down into language that I can understand. And I'm just telling you that that's the kind of teachers that we need in our community. And these women are having an incredible impact. And so thank you for letting me share their comments. I'll probably share them again if the questions go on, but it was just really profound to me to read what they thought, because initially I didn't know what their language background was. I didn't know how they learned. I didn't know what their exposure was. And for all of you who have learned a language as an adult, you know that it's a little bit more difficult than when you were a child. And even evidence is backed up that we do things so backwards here in this country of teaching our children when they're in junior high and high school a world language versus letting them learn when they're small, because that's when the natural ability to learn language is at its strongest. So thank you for listening.
I said it earlier, I was very fortunate, but I'll also say I was spoiled with who I had around me growing up, the opportunities that I had. I did have elders speaking to me, and I may not have understood at such a small age here, but I understood here, and I've carried that with me my entire life. I also started in classes with Birdie and Donna Starr. my parents, my aunties, my uncles were the students in that class, and I was playing under the tables with her grandson Harvey and my sister Shahalis. But it wasn't, as a child, you're not necessarily, I wasn't sat down and said, you're going to listen and you're going to take this class with us. I was playing and learning at the same time, because how I was raised was to always observe and learn and listen from those around us and where we were traveling. And we naturally picked up the language in class, and would play with the words back and forth, or Donna would have songs that would help with the language learning, and that's a natural progression in play for us. And my next teacher was Guy Hilbert in her home, and her nieces, Laura and her mother, who has recently passed, they were teaching classes. Again, they were for adults, and I begged my mom to take me with, and almost got us in trouble because it wasn't meant for children. It wasn't that time to play, and so I sat a few years older and listened and observed in class and participated when I could. But I think it was a learning opportunity for me in an adult setting, but also for those teachers who went on to actually start teaching children in different grades, and sort of showed them that we were ripe and ready for that as well, and we could behave and sit and listen because it was something that we really wanted. And really, there was a time just growing up where looking at those worksheets or the written language, it really didn't click for me. I could speak and I could converse in class and I could recognize words and sounds, but even into my teen years, the reading was very difficult for me, and I kind of just let it sit for a while. It wasn't until 2013, 2014 that I picked up the dictionary again and just said, I'm going to sit with this for a while and I'm going to keep reading and I'm going to absorb. And it was more that cultural connection that is left in these words and these phrases that I was identifying with, things that I had always heard growing up, or kind of filling in more of those puzzle pieces. And I went to, I think it was in 2018 actually, there was an education conference I was speaking at, and I believe Nancy was in the session once, and she was mentioning that Tammy had this class at the University of Washington, and at the time I really didn't have the time to, I was part-time student, full-time working, and I didn't have the time to attend classes on campus, but I logged it away, and the weird blessing of COVID with being shut down and doing classes remotely, I was able to take Tammy's classes, and it's the first time that I've had that reading and the sentence structure and the grammar click because of the way that she teaches. And it's been all of these teachers and all of these elders and ancestors who are, it's how we all learn in our tribes and in our communities. It's not necessarily just one person in your life who's going to be that mentor for you. And for me, it's been so many people, and I've been very fortunate.
Okay, so my mother would speak some words now and then at home. And I remember one time I was like, what did you say? And she said, that's our language. I said, our language? She says, yes, that's our native language. My grandpa spoke it. She said, but I never learned how to speak it myself. And I never realized, again, I never realized how common that statement was, until I really started being out with more people from the different tribal areas, and so many statements were so similar. I learned some language, but I never learned how to speak it. But isn't that what the government wanted? The government wanted us to not know who we were any longer and just be another person in society. And I remember hearing that on the news, of all places, that, what was his name? What was that Senator Lungo? Slade Gordon. Slade Gordon tried to make it a government law that if a tribe no longer knows its language, it should no longer be a tribe. And he really pushed hard for them. And he pushed hard against their native people in Washington State for years and years. And it's been such a struggle. But that one just took the cake. He was no longer senator, so it was like his last fight. And we're so fortunate that he didn't win that fight. Because we're struggling to gain back our language and to make it living again. But that's for us to do naturally, not because he's trying to take away our rights as Southern people. But, you know, the fact that we lose our language, first language speaker loss, has been continual for years. Tom has started his work in the 50s. And then after the years gone by, he realized that there was a decline in first language speakers. And he realized that everything that he had recorded was valuable and vital to our language itself, and that he needed to make it accessible. He needed to make the language to be taught to people in ways that could just be continuous and that would continue. He had so much passion for this work because his contributions were so important. And he knew that and realized that. I could never speak highly enough of him because he was gracious, kind-hearted, hardworking. And there's just seems to be a lack of that sometimes. So we value each other when we're like-minded in that sense. We know people from all of our local tribes and where the tribes stand with the language because Nancy has done so much work networking with tribes and meeting together to learn from each other and working through the growth phase. We didn't want to be one tribe growing with the language. Nancy says we all need to grow together. And so that became a mission. Let's everybody grow together. I started in 1993 and nobody in my tribe, there was no teachings going on. There was no elders left that I know of in my tribe. There wasn't. There were some elders that said, I didn't learn how to speak it, but I do have some words that are my best memory. So listen to what I remember and see if they make sense to you. One of our elders, Berta, actually came to our office and she said, my mother used to walk around the house and she would cry and she would say, shut butter, and she would cry and cry. And so I said, did she lose her son? Did her son die? And she said, actually, yes. My brother died and she would cry saying, shut butter. I said, that's what she's saying. My son, who's not here any longer. His location is somewhere else now. And she would cry for him. And she said, thank you for telling me this because I didn't know what that meant. But that was part of her mourning. Here I go again. And then Betty Pasco and Richard Demain and Delora, they're brothers and sisters in Suquamish. So sweet, elders. Love them so much. And we were working through names in English. And how do you say English names with the tongue of Lushootseed? And so randomly, I don't know if Nancy asked me or something, and so we did the word Richard, and I said Lichen, and I wrote it on the board, and Richard said, oh my goodness. He said, my grandma always called me Lichen, and I didn't know why. He said, I didn't know she was saying it in the language. But that's what she knew, was just the Lushootseed sounds, and so she would speak English in those sounds. And so it's a really good lesson to go through with students or anybody to talk about that, because it's so connecting. You know, there's so much to talk about with Indian English. Washington State has the Indian English section, and it's a native way of speaking English, just like any other indigenous language. There's always an English way of speaking indigenous languages from anywhere in the United States. So we have an Indian English. We have a way of speaking in our communities. You may have heard different types of slang, and it's just really common. And so getting through that and making sense of, I ran the bilingual program at Chief Lachey, and I taught the Lushootseed and English side by side for this program. It was a government-funded program, and when they would come in and certify the programs and the student counts for funding, they said, you have to teach both languages, because the goal of the Bureau is that they learn to speak proficient English. I said, all right. And so I had to assess every student of the school, and I actually did the same thing at Lushootseed, their tribal school, because they were formulating their bilingual program. And so I used the loss assessment, which is language assessment scales, and I had to learn how to administer the test and score it and come up with their level of English proficiency. And so I discovered that, and I would estimate that 80% of all the students in Chief Lachey School were limited English proficient. So there was like a structure of Lushootseed mixed in, or there was maybe it was a sentence structure, maybe it was just the way the English was spoken, you know, and so everything was accounted for. All of their English had to be written verbatim, recorded and transcribed verbatim. And the same thing in Muckleshoot, 80% of the students there were limited English proficient. But I got to have conversations with their teachers to say, the students that had the most difficult time with English, they needed to get English better so they could do better in school, obviously. I mean, we have our tribal ID, we have our driver's license, we have identification for both of our citizenships. And so to teach children that they, of course language is important, but we also know that we can't get rid of English. Our students need to succeed in life in so many different ways. And so Indian English became an important factor in the work that I did. I taught Nancy and I actually co-taught back then, and we taught 220 students every day in half-hour sections. They would come in and they'd go out in a half hour, and the other students were stomping their way through, and so it was all day. I don't think we hardly even took any breaks. Maybe a half-hour lunch. But though it was crazy, but though it was fun, definitely fun days. There was workers, the superintendent didn't understand the cultural relevancy of the design of our school at Chief Lachey, and he ordered this crew to come in and tear up our sacred circle. So when the school was built, it's built in a circular way. The building is all circular, like 3 major buildings. And so before the buildings were built in the foundation, there was all sorts of dirt brought in from South Hill, fuel brought in to fill up the land. And what they did first was they took the dirt of the original ground before the development and pushed it to the center, and then flattened it, and that became the sacred circle. It's the untouched land that's original to that land area of our tribe. And then the rest of the school was built around the sacred circle. So the superintendent came in and he ordered this crew to come in and tear up the sacred circle and put sod on it and try to make it look pretty. Because it really wasn't pretty, but to us it was beautiful because it was natural plants. It was everything that was there. Nobody just walked on the sacred circle. It was just, we always walked around it and felt the presence of it every time we were around it. But when that crew came in and they were doing their work, landscaping it, this wolf appeared. And when the wolf appeared and it circled around the outside of the sacred circle, and it stared at each worker, and every one of those workers said he looked right through me. He looked me and he stared me down. And then they said he just disappeared. We don't know where he left, he was just gone. And so we knew this was a spiritual thing. We know that there's a strong wolf culture down in our area, and we know that wolf came and appeared to be protective. He was like telling them that we're watching you. We're here, we're looking at you, and you be careful on this ground right here. And these guys, they left, they went home, they told their wives or their families, and they were like, you're not going back there. No, you're not going back. And so they refused to come back. And so our cultural leaders at the school of our tribe said, okay, we need to get some help here. So this cultural medicine healer, spiritual healer came to help, and he came to the sacred circle and he walked around it and he said, we need those men to come back. And they said, no, they're not coming back. They refused, they won't come back. He says, no, you go tell them to come back right now. So it wasn't long, they were all there. He said, I need to brush them off. I need to brush off what happened to them and make sure that they live here feeling the right way and that they're not carrying whatever they feel like they might be carrying. So he brushed them off, he sang, put some healing to them, and then let them go back. And it was just really nice. And Nancy and I working in the bilingual program, we felt such significance to this, that we pulled the students together in every single one of our classes, and we said, we need to create a song. And we created the Wolf Protects Us song. The wolf is protecting us. And the students, they helped with it. They put together the melody. We put the words on the board, and every day we'd make them, for like a couple of weeks, read the sentence with them and make them read it, And we're like, you guys are coming up with the melody to the song. And so they did, and then they created the dance with it. And so their dance was walking around in a circular way, protecting, and just looking back and forth, watching over the area and protecting. And then they would stop and they would do a short howl, and they'd go back to the protecting and then stop and howl. It was really cute. I loved that time. But those are some of the joys of doing this work. Back to my story though. I get distracted so much and I apologize for that.
You're answering the question, how did you learn the language?
That's what I was just getting back to. See, there's the smarty pants. Okay, so in 1993, when I started at Chief Leshai, and there was evidence that somebody was teaching in the 1970s, and I think it was Nellie Ramirez. But Ernie Barr, he was living in Muckleshoot, working with Muckleshoot people, but he was Snoqualmie. He came to the school and he did a workshop with language and stories. And so he came in, and so I sat in. I heard it was going on right there, so I just walked in and I sat in with it. And he talked to us about language and the importance of language and how important he felt it was to go. If he was asked to go somewhere, that he would go and he would help share language. And he told some stories. We talked about Sasquatch. And he said there were no traditional stories about Sasquatch, which is one of the things I wanted to know. And then he distributed some booklets that he worked with one of our tribal members on, and distributed that with a CD tape, a cassette tape, not a CD. old-fashioned cassette tape that had the audio of what was in the booklet. And so I had a little bit of a takeaway there. I started working at Lushootseed in the Gifted and Talented program of Visual and Performing Arts as an assistant. Loved it, and we ran Circle. We had Circle every day. And I worked with the kids on painting, coastal art designs, and just painting skills in general. And, but by November, they didn't have culture teachers, so I was asked to move into to be a culture teacher. And so I moved over to do that. And I taught culture classes. I think we had like 16 classes every week that I rotated the classes. But I utilized the materials that Ernie Barr gave me and started using those in the classes, had the children listening to them, and then I would start competitions with them, and whatever class learned the most would get a party. I just had to make things happen, but they got excited, so it didn't take much to excite them. It was really fun. And so this language, bringing it into the classroom, then just started sticking with me. When my mom said that this is our native language, I was like, what? And I absorbed that, you know, as a younger girl, like, we have a language. But then when she said that her grandfather spoke it and she never learned, I never heard of that with other families. I didn't hear that common sense until way later. So I just didn't really think much of it. So when Ernie Barr came with his, and then more materials just started gravitating towards me, and I was like, wow, we have a lot of language here. And then when Nancy came on board, and then she started digging around and researching and finding resources, I was amazed at how much we have. And that we could organize this information and really work at teaching and getting us out and improving the state of our language. But these concepts were not something that I was raised with because it really didn't seem to be an option in the past. There was no option if you don't have an elder. There's no option if you don't have first language speakers because this is an oral language. It wasn't not documented by our native people. It was documented by non-native people from the mid-1800s up till the late 1900s. And so,
Most of it was documented.
most of it, yeah.
There's some people who did some.
And you bring up a good point. Of everything that was documented, of everything that was recorded, it still wasn't everything. So we are working with the language deficit right now. We are working where we have to fill in the holes and we have to fill in those gaps. And in order to do that, we find ourselves looking at local languages to help fill in those pieces. And so if you can make sense of the language and you know the intellect of the language, you can look at a local language and say, hey, that's the word we don't have in our language, and we can see how it's put together. We can then put that together in ours. It becomes a model. And that's one of the things that George Adams does for us, is he says, let's look at your neighbors, and let's look at how they have those words put together, and then you put together your words to match, but in your language. And that's how you keep some of that authenticity that you've lost. Because like Nancy said, those recordings is the authenticity of our language. We need to speak it, we need to speak it the most correct way that we can. We need to listen to those first language speakers. And that's all we have left. And so we have to value that and we have to keep consistent with that. There's no excuse. If you have those recordings, you can't say, oh, well, I forgot. There's no excuses in this work. You have resources, you go to those resources, and you learn. George says, if you don't know something, it's because you didn't ask. And so that's the big lesson, is you have to ask if you want to know, otherwise you will never know. You'll just be ayayash.
Well, we're near the end of our time already, and so you've kind of already given us some of those resources and told us about some of the big formal language revitalization work that's happening. Of course, here at the University of Washington, so incredible because anybody here can take classes, can learn the Lushootseed right here, which is so exciting. There's of course the Lushootseed Tribal Language Program that's in the schools and across the tribe at Chief Leshai School, if you want your young folks to learn the Lushootseed as well. But how else can we all be a part of these efforts of language revitalization? Of course, there's learning the language, which some of us, I hope, will do. We now know Lushootseed, which is, that's a start. And supporting, of course, in a lot of different ways, with money, with volunteering, with spreading the word about all of these different language programs. But if anyone would like to share other resources and programs, organizations that are doing this important revitalization work, and what you want each of us to do to support you and to support these folks that are bringing back this, and really not bringing back, but just growing this incredible language.
Okay, thank you. I'm just gonna start really quick because I got the microphone.
Take it away.
So, of course, I have classes that I teach here at the UW. I have a 3-quarter sequence. The first 2 quarters are all grammatical breakdowns of the language, and I teach about the whole grammatical structure and about understanding the language. And you have to know what you're saying, so that and then adapt that and reconstruct it to more phrases and more avenues of communication. So I teach those skills. The 3rd quarter is all about stories. You're learning how to speak the stories. You have to break down the grammar of the full story. We have 3 of them we go through in that quarter. And then I test on the speaking proficiency. The first 2 quarters are tested on your grammatical proficiency, but the 3rd quarter is speaking. So people come out of that 3rd quarter, if you've gone through all 3, you're really good. And I can tell you it's very effective, and it just energizes you even further to stick with Lushootseed and go further into it. And my goal is that every student becomes a lifelong learner. Every student can leave my class and continue to research and to learn and to make sense of the language.
And only 3 quarters. That's not a huge amount of time to learn so.
I become a speaking coach on the 3rd quarter, so it's all healthy. It's a constructive criticism. It's never knocking you down. It's to build you up, but it's really good. I've had a student do a review of my class saying that you felt lucky to get corrected. That was one of the best compliments I could hear.
Second, we gotta talk about
Yes, now I have a 2nd year that I teach. I teach 2 courses. Additionally from those 3, I teach a calendar course, which McKenna took my course last year. That was my first time teaching it actually. It's a seasonal calendar. It's like a cultural calendar, and it really teaches you to look at the cultural preservation of where things were in the past and how they are today. And the cultural calendar, the moons, how the moons are in relation, the environment, just the general workings. Understand the tribe's culture because you're looking at the geographical areas of that tribe. It's really important to know these things. And then my other class that I teach is an extraction class. It's taking old documents and old recordings and extracting language, and I teach people how to look at it if it's written, or to listen to it if it's an audio, and take that language and extract what is in those recordings and document it onto a spreadsheet. So now it's usable preserved language and not just in somebody's orthography or just in audio form. Because the problem that most tribes have at this point is, I think about every tribe has documents and recordings, but they don't know how to use them. And they don't know how to get that language out. And so my feeling is I want people to learn how to do that. I want to teach that ability, and it helps the language at the same time, so why not? Nancy, were you wanting to speak?
I think everybody wants to.
I think if you get a chance to take 10 of these classes, I would go back. Yeah?
Yes, I'm sorry, I have one more. Before I started here, before I actually started working and teaching here, Nancy and I held community classes at the round table, so the Lushootseed round table. And Chris Tuton, he's now the chair of the American Indian Studies Department. He has requested that we still continue because COVID put a stop to everything, the pandemic. And he wants it to continue, and I'm kind of watching to see when the best time to start that up is. But teaching a round table for the university before the pandemic, was every week. I think it was like every Wednesday we had class. It was like a community class, so anybody could come in and learn language. And I would kind of suit it to the interests. Like I've had some people that self-study Lushootseed that just wanted to learn a little bit better, or to understand that they were in the right direction, I guess, so to speak. Or some people were totally new with it and just had the interest to learn. I also have students every quarter that are access students. So if you're a former student of UW, you can be an access student and come into these classes and just learn without the accountability. You don't have to do assignments and testing, which is nice, but you get to learn.
Well, now I'm coming back for all of your classes. But seriously, the learning aspect, I think, goes beyond just learning that it's important to understand the history that's tied again to this land, to the people, to the language. So I really encourage you to learn the different tribes and cultures that still carry this language on too.
Currently, we have one of our language teachers. She's teaching via Zoom. Most of it is directed towards adults. If you go to the Muckleshoot website, I think that you could probably find her classes on there. If not, then you can contact the Muckleshoot language program and we will get you connected with that. She's starting tomorrow. Her first class will be, it'll be tomorrow at noon. And she teaches, I think, 2 on Tuesdays and 2 on Thursdays. And she's very proficient with the language, so I encourage you. Also, Muckleshoot has a really great YouTube videos for the language that you can listen to and see the language actually on a screen as well. It helps with the pronunciation. You can also contact the Muckleshoot language program to get any kind of usable language materials that you might want to have. We can see about getting together with you and getting you copies of those. I would just encourage you, and I'm going to have to dip out here really quick, but I think my passion that I would want to leave you with, all of you, for those of you that were able to stay to the end, is that what we've seen over and over in our culture and language is people who get a little snippet of our culture and our language and they exploit it to the point of profiting from it. It's really hurt us. And it's diminished our ability as Native people to access our language because of the shame that's come from it. So, as an individual, my call to you is whatever you glean from tonight, whatever you take with you, honor it in a good way. And if you don't know if something's right or wrong in a cultural way, then ask the Native people of this area that you are living on. That's the best advice I can give you, is to honor them, because we are worthy. We have intellectual knowledge. When this building was created was the person who created the name, who translated the name of the intellectual as. And in 2000, Vi Hilbert translated a name that my mother asked her to translate. The name was Wisdom Seeker. My mom said, I want to name one of my children Wisdom Seeker because that is an identifier of the child. And so Vi and my mom worked together and she came up with Lushootseed. It's the Wisdom Seeker. And that was the name that I was honored with. So I take it very seriously about this language, really, really protective of it. As I want you to be now that you have information, now you're all responsible to honor it and lift it up. And I challenge all of you, wherever your ancestors came from, learn your language from your homelands because it's an identifier of who you are. And when you connect to that language and you connect to your roots, your land, your people, it will make you fluff up inside with pride because you know you came from an honorable place. Learn your languages.
Okay. I really can't add anything to that. I think I would just say, Lushootseed, Lushootseed, Hawa, Deutschkom, Playkom, Heiska. Well, Kuni, right here. Hayamasi, if you're Chinook. Pila Maila Yala, if you're Lakota. And so all of these words mean the same thing. They simply mean thank you. And all of these people are here. All of these different tribes. The Tlingit, the Haida, the Tsimshian, the Lummi, the Muckleshoot, the Suquamish, the Snoqualmie, the Duwamish, the Puyallups, Billiken. Down on the coast, you got the Chinooks. You got the Cowlicks, and over in the east, you got the Lakotas. So, if you make it to Quebec, make sure you say, Miigwech, because that's their word for thank you. So, that's really the only thing I could add to that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And there's nothing I can add to that either. Thank you all so much, and thank you for coming. This is recorded, so please share it. And thank you. Have a lovely day.